We are living in peak naked sport bike history, so much so that we're all rapidly getting used to a new term in biking, which is the hyper naked. No longer content with a naked bike that is also pretty sporty, we've had to create a special category for bikes that are essentially full-on superbikes but with a higher handlebar. These bikes are all quite simply breathtaking sport bikes, and though I have been a fan of Aprilia's Tuono for longer than I have the rest, they are now all worthy of topping your own list of desirable sport bikes, never mind desirable naked bikes. All pump out 175 horsepower or more, all have the highest levels of quality when it comes to suspension and braking, and all have electronics of such complexity that they would make a top-of-the-range superbike from only a decade ago look like a broken PlayStation 1 next to the new PS5. In the evolutionary process that has resulted in this higher species of naked bike, we seem to have left behind one or two bikes that were previously also considered apex predators. I'm thinking of the likes of Yamaha's wonderful MT-10, whose 160 horsepower and all-round ability seem, on paper at least, to have been consigned to the dustbin of history. And don't even mention Suzuki or Honda, who with the GSX S1000 and CB1000 aren't really playing this hardcore sporting game. Kawasaki is skirting around the edges with its admirably bonkers ZH2, but it's not something you'd consider particularly suited for a track day. And that leaves us with another big player in the world of sport bikes, BMW. Its S1000R debuted back in 2014, and at that point it was definitely in the top tier of naked sport bikes. But time marched on and the competition became ever more fierce, with the BMW now finding itself justifying its place at the top table and finding it difficult to do so. Not that it wasn't a great bike. I'll be honest and admit I was a fan from the very beginning, so much so that in 2019 I bought a 2016 version of the bike and I was very happy indeed with my decision. No, it didn't have the KTM's epic engine or the Aprilia's divine chassis, but as an everyday bike that could be both reliable and bonkers, fast yet also comfortable, and still smother me with a sophisticated electronic safety net, it was beyond reproach. Well, almost beyond reproach, because the engine was horribly vibey at certain RPM, but otherwise it never let me down. And when I wanted to wheelie everywhere and generally behave irresponsibly, it was more than happy to play along. Now that BMW has released a revised version of the S1000R for 2021, I have high hopes of a bike for which I've always had a bit of a soft spot. First impressions are important, and visually it's okay from this angle. There's a neat single seat tail unit on the M model, but I've got it with the pillion seat and passenger foot pegs on this particular example because I need to carry my camera lady. Come round to the front end though, and well, it's a bit disappointing really, a bit anonymous, bland even. I think this is pretty much the same headlight that's on the F900R, and it's not so bad there, but that's a more run-of-the-mill kind of middleweight model. This is flagship naked bike territory, and it lacks some character. The squinty headlights on the older version may have split opinion, but at least they had a certain presence. I liked them myself, but this just looks to me a little too generically Japanese. Actually, that's a load of rubbish, because if there's one thing the Japanese have done with a bit of panache recently, it's been front-end looks. MT-10 anyone? Or the new GSX S1000 perhaps? Or even the new MT-09? Nah, I think BMW's dropped the ball a bit here, but no worries. The one thing we do know that they do well is build brilliant engines. With a 207 horsepower superbike in the family, you just know this is going to be a fire-breathing monster. Except it isn't. 165 horsepower is obviously nothing to be sniffed at, especially when it comes in a package that BMW claims is the lightest in the class. But in that same time frame, it's gone from making significantly more horsepower than Triumph's Speed Triple to making significantly less. The engine is a derivative of the current S1000RR, a great engine no doubt, but BMW has decided to ditch the shift cam technology and rein in the RPM because, they argue, quite logically, if slightly too dispassionately, that such complex engine trickery isn't required on a naked bike because it doesn't need the top-end hit of the superbike. The thing is, scaring yourself silly on a leery sport bike isn't really all that logical in the first place, is it? I can, of course, sort of see their point, but I do think they've missed an opportunity to lend an air of individuality to the S1000R. Let's remember, after all, that this is a model that is competing in a class bursting with characterful V4s, a huge V-twin and an all-new triple. The only other inline 4 in the mix has got a cross-plane crank to help give it a genuinely unique attraction. This is not exactly a slow or uninteresting engine, far from it. In fact, it's got pretty decent grunt right off the bottom end, but it's above 6,000 RPM where you're going to have the most fun. In that mad rush up to the red line, there is a decent hit of power. And to keep it in that range involves you playing with the gearbox, which has got an absolutely fantastically smooth and accurate two-way auto blipper gear shift. It's simply wonderful. The previous model always felt pretty maneuverable to me, but this new version ups the ante significantly. It's ridiculously agile and flickable, and yet on the road at least it's also as solid and planted as you could wish for. Throw in an equally meaty set of brakes with good power and feel and you're set for lots of enjoyment down a stretch of your favourite back road. Where BMW always comes out on top these days is in the electronics, and not just the riding aids, but the way you interact with everything electronic on the bike. You check everything on the best TFT display in the business, and there's a nifty sport display where you can sort your data from your last ride, stuff like brake pressure, the level of traction control intervention, lean angles to either side, and of course, if you have the free BMW app downloaded, also the best in the business, this type of thing is recorded for posterity and can be mapped onto the route you've been riding. Absolutely brilliant stuff, even for a technophobe like me who remembers when telephones were attached to a cable in your house and were only used for special occasions. Anyway, as you'd expect, there's a load of different riding modes, and changing them affects everything from the levels of ABS and traction control intervention to the sensitivity of the throttle, and if you have the electronic suspension, then you also get different setups according to the level of sportiness you have dialed in. With this being the M package, there's a couple of extras to consider, apart from the obvious one, which is the M Sport colour combination, the Akrapovic silencer and the special seat. You also get a set of lighter forged wheels, and you save a little bit more weight with a lithium battery, and the bike comes fitted with the special X-ring chain that has the very useful bonus of never needing any lubrication, and even more importantly, no adjustment, ever. If you're only half as lazy as me, that's a serious win. As an owner of an earlier version of this bike, I can feel that it's been improved. I can appreciate the greater range of its suite of electronics, and I can also appreciate the increased agility, the greater responsiveness of the handling. It is a more enjoyable bike down a road like this. But as a fan of the bike, I feel that it now lacks more than ever, that bit of passion, that element of love over logic, that touch of madness that would make it a contender for my money in this extraordinarily competitive class. I regret that it looks quite so ordinary. And logic be damned. What's logical about this much performance in a naked bike anyway? We don't buy or lust after these machines because of logic. We want them because they are illogical, pointless, silly, a bit mental. Looking at the alternatives with a wallet full of money to spend, a customer is surely going to be swayed by a more interesting engine configuration, bigger horsepower numbers and more interesting looks. That's the sort of logic that might ultimately condemn BMW's fantastically capable S1000R to a period of relative anonymity in this heyday of the naked sport bike. Don't get me wrong, it might sound like I'm down on the new S1000R, but I'm not. It's definitely a fast, easy to ride and overall very impressive bike, and I would be extremely happy to have one in the garage. It's just that this has become an incredibly competitive class, and as I said, there's some serious competition for your cash if you're in the market for a bike like this. Where I think it makes most sense, given the huge cost of everything in the 170 plus horsepower category, is if you get the bike in its most basic form. No electronic suspension, none of the huge range of electronic extras, fewer riding modes, but importantly, you still get quality normal suspension, the traction control and cornering ABS, and crucially, exactly the same horsepower and brakes. All the other stuff is lovely, but not essential. So if you can ignore it and just get the basics, then you get a hugely powerful and capable naked sport bike for about a third less than the one with all the options. That makes it a genuine bargain and a very sensible buy. And on that note, let's go for a short break.